Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, former chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, member from Seattle, Washington, where I was at the weekend. Great city. Good to have you back, Congresswoman.
It's always great to be with you. I really enjoyed this last time we did it.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, I think, for our subscribers to be able to put their questions directly to people in power. Already 100 people have joined the call. That'll keep going up. Appreciate all of you Zeteo paid subscribers for being here from around the world. I'm going to ask some questions first, and then I'll bring you guys in. Remember to put your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, in the Q&A. We already have one from Scott. We'll come back to that. It's a good question, actually. Congresswoman, let me just kick off with a very straightforward question. Are Democrats doing enough to stop the ridiculous autocratic takeover of our government, our federal government, our departments by an unelected, unvetted billionaire?
Well, I think we're doing everything we can. I think that there is, some people are more connected to their constituents and to inside-outside organizing than others. But I think the reality is we've all got to have a three-prong approach, right? We got to use every power we have within Congress. That does not include moving bills because we don't have the power of the majority to do that. But it does include really using our platforms to call out the abuses, to make sure that we're shining a light on them, to hold Republicans accountable, as we have done in every hearing in the Judiciary Committee, including birthright citizenship yesterday, the executive order on birthright citizenship. So that's our big role. Number two, we are really working closely around the lawsuits. We don't have the ability because of standing to file amicus briefs in every single one, but where we can, we're doing that, and we're coordinating with the partners who are filing lawsuits to make sure that we are really pushing on that front. But the third is maybe the most important, which is what I call inside-outside organizing. This is the coordinated strategy and tactics to make sure we turn out the public, including us, but our constituents across the country, and to plan some strategic coordinated actions, whether it's general strikes, whether it's nonviolent resistance, getting people trained. That's a lot of what we are trying to do on the campaign side, is making sure that we are preparing for the moments when we can have a giant coordinated movement to protest the overtaking of our Constitution and the destruction of our government, the destruction of our democracy, and the stealing of authoritarian power by a dictator.
Which is what's happening. It's a real existential moment. And rightly or wrongly, there are many people in the country who think Democrats are not doing enough. You're a member of Congress. You know better than me. Your phone, I'm sure, has been ringing and ringing. I'm sure people have been calling into your office to say, do more, take a stand. And obviously, you individually can do what you can do, but you are part of a wider infrastructure. And not everyone on the Democratic side sings from the same hymn book, let's be honest. Some people like to take more action than others. Some like to speak out more than others. But you would accept, would you not? The perception is, you look at the polls, the Democratic Party's branding, rating, reputation is in the tank. You would agree that the perception is Democrats aren't doing enough.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of fear. It's a lot of, sort of people recognizing how deep the situation is and being frustrated by the fact that that we're in this situation. And I share that anger. I share that frustration. And I think that the calls I get, and I think for a lot of our Democratic colleagues, it's members it's our constituents wanting to know, what can they do? How can they be a part of pushing back? How can they work with us? What can we do? What can they do? And so there's been a lot of information sharing, and you've seen these crazy numbers of people participating in town halls.
Yes.
Even my in-person town hall had 2,500 people signed up, lines around the block.
I heard when I was in Seattle, that's what they were talking about.
That's what everyone was talking about. It was a front page story of the Seattle.
But you didn't get booed like the Republicans at their town hall, I assume.
I did not get booed, but people are turning out. Look, the way I think about organizing, because Mehdi, I was an organizer for a couple of decades before coming into Congress. People take the first step. The easiest step is to call their Congress member and express their frustration. From there, you can help people understand what is the next step they can take. How do they call 5 friends in Republican states and Republican districts and go and ask them to go and talk to their members of Congress? That's why these town halls in Republican districts have been very, very powerful. Because at the end of the day, if you have an authoritarian, a dictator who refuses to listen to the judiciary, who refuses to respect Article 1 powers of Congress, the only force, and you have covered this around the world, the only force that can actually stop that is the people in the streets with nonviolent resistance movements that have been very effective in other countries.
But so far in this call, you've said nonviolent resistance twice. You've said people in the streets. You've said general strike. I haven't heard Hakeem Jeffries, your boss in the House, or others in the leadership say stuff like that. They recoil from that kind of direct action. In fact, Hakeem Jeffries is going on radio shows. He just went on the Stephen A. Smith show and said, oh, I get attacked by the left all the time. They're actually getting annoyed, according to reporting from Axios, that people are calling them up and attacking them.
Well, I've tried to tell a lot of my colleagues who are like, why are people targeting us? That we are elected by the people. We represent the people. It is our job to listen to the people, and it is our job to then help direct people in a coordinated strategy. I've always said that being a progressive just means you're the first to the best and most just idea, and then everyone else has to run to catch up. So is it going to be progressives that are really developing the organizing strategy and the coordinated strategy that I'm talking about? Is it going to be progressives that are first to making sure that we are actually bringing together a movement that can do what I'm talking about? Yes, it is. Will other people come along? Yes, they will. Because in this moment, it is so serious. And I think you did hear, because one of the other powerful tools we have as Democrats, and I did talk to the leader about this, and he said this yesterday during the press conference, we have to be united in refusing to give them a single vote. That is one thing we can do. Now, we don't.
But you're not, right? In the Senate, certainly not. Senate Democrats have been voting for
multiple. Don't confuse the Senate. One thing I realized at my town hall is people were really pissed off at the Senate.
Yes.
And they should be.
Are you pissed off at the Senate?
I'm frustrated because, yes, they
I saw Jackie Rosen from Nevada on CNN saying, we don't have the majority. What can we do? She's voted for about 7 appointees. You know what she could do? Is take a stand against Trump appointees. I
think it's the people in the streets and the people calling and the rallies of groups outside that finally got the Senate to focus, the Senate Democrats to focus on really holding together the caucus. And it's been not perfect, but it's been significantly better since all of that happened. So I hope people that are listening take away the message that you are very powerful.
Yes.
Your actions and what you do is very powerful for changing the course or the trajectory of what Democrats and Republicans do in the House or the Senate. But I wouldn't confuse the House and the Senate in the sense that we don't have the power of confirmation. I think a lot of people are upset. I was upset to see all.
But was it a mistake then? Let's go back to the House before I take questions from our subscribers who've been waiting patiently. Was it a mistake for Hakeem Jeffries, your boss in the House, to say, we have no leverage? Number one, that's not fully true. Even if it was true, why are you saying it out loud and making yourself seem so weak and enfeebled?
Well, look, I just don't believe in criticizing the leader of the Democratic Party openly. I'm going to try to.
But you disagree with that view. You disagree with the view you have no leverage.
I don't know that he said that, but if he said that, I would disagree with that. I think what he was trying to say, because I know we had this conversation in the caucus, the Republicans are trying to project that if the government shuts down because they can't come to a funding agreement to do all the terrible things that they want to do, slashing Medicaid, getting rid of the Department of Education, cutting air traffic control, all the things that they want to do, and they come to us for votes, that we're not going to give them votes for that. And yes, we have to be really clear. We're not going to be complicit in that. And what they're trying to say is that if we don't do that, that we are the ones who are responsible for shutting down the government. I think what Hakeem was saying, maybe, I don't know the context of that comment, was that we don't have the power to shut down the government. When we don't control the House, the Senate, or the White House, the power to shut down the government is the Republicans and the Republicans only. We have the ability to actually control our votes, and we are not going to be complicit with giving our votes. So in that sense, maybe we don't have the leverage. We don't have the leverage to move bills forward. Yeah. That is true. We can't move legislation. So on certain,
but there are many things that you can do, and you've suggested some of them. I do also want to talk about Gaza before we wrap up today at 6:30. We've got another half an hour with you, Congresswoman. Appreciate your time. We've got about 200 people in the call waiting, a bunch of questions. I'm not going to be able to get through all of them, but let's try. Scott Scowcroft, who is a West Seattle voter, says, do the Democrats have or plan to create their own version of Project 2025? If not, why not? Great question.
It is a great question. I don't think we have a direct Project 2025 was a destruction of government. We do have, and a destruction of our Constitution, and a white nationalist fascist document of how to install a dictator and to take over power from the country. But we certainly have an offensive agenda, a proactive agenda for how we restore the integrity of this country and the ability to stop the billionaires, including unelected billionaires, from giving themselves a $4.5 trillion tax cut and destroying all the programs and services that people depend on, like nursing homes, and also how we ensure that and this is harder, I don't have the answers on this, but how we ensure when you have a party that is a cult party that does not actually stand up for the Constitution, Article 1 powers, doesn't stand up, for following judicial decisions. What do you do, Mehdi? Because that question, I think, is still out there, because the founders sort of assumed that you were going to have people of both sides who follow the Constitution, not follow a cult leader.
The founders didn't even have political parties in their vision, let alone a cult-like party. I think, though, Scott was focusing on something very important that I feel strongly about, which is the Republicans have message discipline. They have a plan. They stick to it. They are kind of singularly focused on what they want to do, whether it's tax cuts for billionaires or destruction of federal bureaucracy. And when you've seen Democrats come in like Obama and Biden, you haven't quite seen the same hit the ground running. We have a mandate, get the F out of the way. There's a little bit more hesitancy when Democrats are in office, trying to bring everyone along under the big tent.
Look, we can't take a butter knife to a gunfight, right?
No,
like we have to come in with real tools. I would just say that when Biden came in, I think we got a lot of stuff done in the first 2 years,
especially with the American Rescue Plan.
Agreed. Clear plan around that. I would push back a little bit on the messaging this time around. I think Democrats have actually been it's somewhat recent, but it's showing up already in the polls. I mean, Donald Trump is extremely unpopular. Elon Musk is even more unpopular. People don't like the corruption. 2/3 of Americans say that Donald Trump is doing nothing to lower prices. Over half of Americans say he's bringing in corruption instead of taking it out. So I do think that, sometimes messaging takes a little bit of time, and it's hard to imagine, Mehdi, that it's only been a month. I mean, I don't know.
That's true. It feels like a year. But is it credit to the Democrats that Republicans are doing badly? You talk about messaging. I heard Hakeem Jeffries say Donald Trump is Captain Chaos. Really, after 10 years? Surely you guys have to come up with a better name than that. But I wonder whether it's Bill Cephas asks in the comments, is James Carville right to say, just kick back and let the GOP collapse on its own? Because listening to you speak, somebody could say, well, yeah, the Democrats, they don't need to do anything. Trump is unpopular, Musk is unpopular, the policies are unpopular. What's your view?
It's, it's very rare that I agree with James Carville. I think I might have said it before James Carville. We have to let the Republicans stew in their complete disaster, that they're creating. And the thing that's going to be hard for Democrats about that is that we actually believe in governance. We actually believe in minimizing pain for ordinary Americans. We actually are the people that care about those things. And so sometimes we want to rush in to try and save, with the argument that if we save a tiny group of people, then that's better than destroying everybody. But I actually think in this situation, what we have to do is let the Republicans self-destruct. And that is going to mean not going in to try to save them with the ability of, letting them do what they're doing. At the very end, when they're really destructed, then we should go in and save the day. Yeah.
Isn't the problem,
on
though,
our terms, not on their terms? We
isn't
can't
the problem,
save
though,
them and allow them to do terrible things.
Agree with that. But isn't the problem of kicking back the assumption that we're in normal political times, and therefore the pendulum swings to the right and then it swings back? A president gets elected and then there are midterms in which he loses seats.
Oh, well, I should have said I didn't read James Carville's article. Sorry.
I'm just making a broader point.
I don't pay a lot of attention to it, but somebody else framed it to me as let them
get out of the way. But what I'm saying is, even if that's the correct view and there's merits to that view, there is an assumption amongst Democrats more broadly in the media that 2026 and the midterms, and that's when.
Oh no, I don't subscribe to that at all. I mean, look, I subscribe to it in the narrow sense that is going to be a real fight, and it is important for us to win back the House. I do believe that. I do not believe that this is a cyclical thing and this has happened over and over. No, I went back even this election. This election is not about what happened in this election. This election is about at least a decade, but really more like 15 years, where we have been losing working class voters, where we have been losing Black and brown folks, where we have been losing people who don't have faith in the Democratic Party, may not even vote for the other side, though some of them are, but they're not going to vote for us. And we have treated that entire group of people as if they're expendable. And we have not fought back against NAFTA. Originally, I think some of this can be traced back, TPP, TPA. We have not fought back against billionaires controlling our political system. We have not insisted that we are going to invest in worker organizing and collective bargaining, in strengthening unions and raising the minimum wage. These are economic things.
But is that changing now? Because just to be devil's advocate, I'm sorry to bring up your boss again. Hakeem Jeffries went to Silicon Valley to tell the billionaires that,
you're really trying to get me here on this particular
I wish he didn't give me so many opportunities, but when you say billionaires, I remember that he just went to Silicon Valley and said, guys, we're still on side. And a lot of people, as you know, in your base, were upset because Chris Murphy, senator, is out there saying neoliberalism was a wreck. It was a disaster. He's sounding like Bernie Sanders. But in the House, you've still got people saying, well, we don't want to lose that billionaire wing of the party.
Look, we're always going to have that. That is an existential fight for the Democratic Party that we have to see whether we can play it out. You know which side I've been on. I was a supporter of Bernie Sanders back in 2016. I was the chair of the Bernie for America campaign in 2020 in my state. I'm very close to that view.
Yes.
That is my view.
Yeah.
And, I think that...
But it's still not the whole party's view.
It's not. It's not. You're seeing it play out even after the election. Look, I'll be honest, I was very frustrated with the people who immediately started blaming the left for everything, when the reality is, Mehdi, had we passed Build Back Better, which was only passed the House because of progressives. We only got the Inflation Reduction Act because of progressives. Had we actually passed that, we would have taken on the two biggest inflationary costs that people in this country are facing: housing and childcare. And had we taken on those two big inflationary costs, we may have won the election. It was not progressive Democrats that stopped that from happening.
Agreed.
It was conservative so-called Democrats in the Senate, who are no longer there, who stopped that from happening. So
yes, indeed.
But immediately the knives came out against the progressives and against leftists.
As we knew it would.
We just see it every time. I'm the chair of the Progressive Caucus for 4 years. I was the chair of the Progressive Caucus for 4 years. I was the vice chair 2 years before that. So
blame the left. We've seen that movie many times, and Mansion Cinema thankfully gone, but now we have Fetterman. Oz Huck asks, I fear that there will be no elections in 2026. This administration will look for reasons: a war, a state of emergency, too many domestic protests, to use dictatorial behavior. Are people in power worried about 2026 and there being no free and fair elections?
I mean, I think we're worried about that. We're worried about this moment where we literally are seeing a dictator seize power of the armed forces. The complete reshuffling and firing of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, of a number of others, and installing his own loyalists at the Department of Justice, free speech issues, throwing out the press. All of these are hallmarks of dictatorial behavior. So not having elections is, of course, sort of down the line, but is absolutely part of dictatorial behavior. That's why I'm talking about serious training in nonviolent resistance. It's why I'm talking about the need for the public to understand the severity. When we're talking about, even in Judiciary Committee today, they won't even acknowledge that it was an insurrection that occurred on January 6th, right? And they're trying to argue that an executive order on eliminating birthright citizenship, which has been in our 14th Amendment for more than 100 years, that somehow there's no problem with the president trying to eliminate it, even though 4 judges, including a judge in my home state of Washington, Judge Kuhnauer, who was appointed by Reagan,
yes,
said this is blatantly unconstitutional.
Well,
Right.
they only care about the Second Amendment. The rest of the amendments are up for negotiation. A lot of our subscribers are very upset with your party. So I want to read out some of their comments. Andrea King says, Mitch McConnell got a lot done while in the minority. What are you doing? You opened with saying you're doing all you can. You are not. I think she means the Democrats on you personally. I'm an enraged Democrat and absolutely revolted by the spineless weakness of this party. I'm sure you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
I'll read out another question from an anonymous member of the audience. He says, Congresswoman, I'm a constituent of yours. Yaz. Okay, there's a name. I was deeply disappointed to see both the House and the Senate re-elect Senator Schumer and Congressman Jeffries to their positions. After the way this last election went, isn't it clear that those in the party, that people keep voting for the status quo and we need something different? Do you want to
Yeah,
do a couple of those kind of thoughts?
I understand the frustration. I share the anger. I share the rage. I'm out here every day working on it, and we are trying to do everything we can. And so I don't begrudge people their anger. I think we should embrace it, and we should say, yes, we feel it too. I feel it every single day. It's a nonstop barrage of things, and that is not a bug, it's the feature. They want to flood the zone. They want to make everybody feel powerless and enraged, and they want us to turn our anger on each other instead of on the billionaires that are controlling everything, and all the corruption, the conflicts of interest, the ignoring of Article 1 powers. I mean, this is not the same. This is a different kind of fight. And I agree that we have to have different tools to fight this battle. And that's what I'm working on. I just think that we got to create a people's movement, and we got to push back hard, and we got to take on the Republicans who are, Murkowski, Collins, some of these people. They say, "Oh, I'm concerned about this," but did you vote for those people? You put them in. And I think we should make sure we train our anger on Republicans who enabled this, who were part and parcel of this entire coup that we're in the midst of. This is a constitutional crisis in the middle of a coup. And so I think we have to be aware of the severity of it.
Yes. Ben Linder says, we Democrats lack a clear leader. Our primaries are 3 years away. We need Democrats to select a leader, and it needs to be someone with the charisma to take on Trump and MAGA. Leader Jeffries ain't it. Well, who will step up and provide the kind of leadership that Andrew Cuomo provided New Yorkers during the early days of the pandemic? Controversial take there, as Andrew Cuomo prepares to return for his mayoral campaign. We'll pop that for a moment. But if we put Cuomo to one side, there is a sense that Democrats don't have a charismatic. We don't need the party doesn't need authoritarian like the Republicans have, but someone who can go out and swing.
Yeah, I think we don't. I think we are leaderless at the moment. I mean, our presidential candidate did not win. That was not a primary that that really where we went through a big primary process where we had people competing for the presidential election. That's typically where leadership comes from. And I think that is a real problem. So yes, I think people are positioning themselves now. Assuming we have elections in 4 years, we are in need of a leader of the Democratic Party. I don't think we have that right now. And so I think we don't even have, as we were talking about earlier, we don't have the same vision of what happened in this election, and therefore we don't have the same solutions. If you put me in charge, I would have a very different. By the way, I can't run for president. I wasn't born in this country, though I suppose at this point the Constitution is being ignored on every other case.
You're going to run for a third term, so you might as well run as a foreign-born American citizen. Go for it. Stephen Levinson says, does the Democratic Party have a plan to take back the House in a year and a half? Will this include an attempt to pass progressive legislation and save Medicare and Social Security?
Yeah, I mean, again, we can't pass legislation on our own unless we get 3 people, but we certainly have a plan to highlight the fact that we have all these bills, by the way. We have Social Security 2100. It expands and protects Social Security. We have Medicare for All, which, not every House member is on, but we've been continuing to push on that front. We are fighting back against the slashing of Medicaid, the biggest cuts to Medicaid in the history of this country, actually. And it's a floor right now of $880 billion. So yes, we have a plan to expand healthcare, to ensure that we're providing education, to provide housing, to address childcare. The economic issues that people are facing are what we have to focus on, and the transfer of wealth to the billionaire class. So, after the budget last night, I said 99% of Republicans voted for that horrific Republican budget resolution last night and showed us that they want to support the 1% of people. And I think
Yes.
Democrats have to really hone in on this economic message and the billionaire class that's stealing from people, both in terms of cutting benefits and programs that people rely on, but also taking
Yes.
your tax dollars and transferring them to the wealthiest and saying, oh, you should be grateful if we give you a couple of weeks of groceries in
Yes.
a so-called middle class tax cut. Let's be clear. They are getting yachts and gold bars, and they're giving people, maybe a week or two of groceries, depending on how high prices go. It's actually going to be even less than that. Don't accept it. Don't fall for their analysis that somehow the middle class is getting saved. No, Jeff Bezos is going to buy another yacht. Elon Musk is going to continue to have Tesla pay zero in federal taxes, which what's happened for the last couple of years. So this is what they're doing. We already saw it with Trump tax scam 1.0. We need to focus on the economic message, both defensively and offensively.
On that note, Nishat Akhtar asks, really appreciate all of the coordinated effort and movement, but unfortunately we are in a reactive mode, just waiting for the next dictatorial action, and then we react. How is Congress, I assume he means Democrats in Congress, trying to get ahead of these circumstances?
Well, in the minority party, you are somewhat of a reactive party. So the only proactive thing you can do is introduce legislation, which we've done, doesn't move anywhere. And so again, today is a good example. I was in a markup. It was supposed to be a simple markup of a oversight plan for the Judiciary Committee. We turned it into a referendum on January 6th, and on the fact that Donald Trump pardoned 1,500 people who were convicted of assaulting the Capitol, of assaulting law enforcement officers, and we shifted the narrative and the conversation. Those are the things that we can do right now to make sure that we are really taking on the Republicans and not just being defensive, but actually proactively putting our things forward. On immigration, I'm the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee. Of course, we have to do a lot of defensive work because they're doing mass deportations of people across the country, and we have to fight back against that. But we also have a proactive plan to go to places, and if any of you are in these sorts of places, you should contact my office and let me know, where you see mass deportations or the threat of mass deportations in a Republican district or a Republican state, where the economy is collapsing, where communities are being destroyed, where families are being separated. These are the places we're going to go to because we need to put them on the offense and introduce our own version of humane modernization of our immigration system.
So we've got loads of questions. We've got like 50 questions in the chat, and we've got 15 minutes. We're not going to get through. I'm going to try as fast as we can to get through them. Amanda Greenwood asks, do you have a plan for when Trump ignores the court? It's already happening on a small scale. But what happens when inevitably he says, make me? What do we do?
Look, this is going to have to go to the people. I'm sorry to keep repeating this. I'm not trying to shy away from this. This is why I'm doing all the training I'm doing around civil disobedience and what you do in the case of a dictator. Because what happens, a lot of people have said, what happens if he ignores the courts? So what happens is, even if the judge says, I want to enforce this decision, what they do is they put the U.S. Marshals, that person is subject to the U.S. Marshals, basically coming to enforce the law, putting them in jail, whatever it is. Well, guess where the U.S. Marshals are? The U.S. Marshals are in the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
And the Department of Justice is staffed by a Trump loyalist who has already shown that he's not willing to prosecute not only January 6th people he's pardoned, but also he's making deals with Mayor Adams. Listen, I'm not going to pursue criminal charges against you, but you're going to do what I want you to do. And people are, and so we've seen that over and over again. So it's going to come down to the people. That's not an abdication of responsibility. It has to be an inside-outside strategy. We've got to have lawmakers and leaders calling for that.
John Bonifaz says, since Donald Trump assumed office last month, he has committed multiple abuses of power. These include abusing the pardon power, unconstitutionally trying to strip U.S. citizens of citizenship, corruptly empowering Elon Musk, threatening the displacement of Palestinians, defying federal court orders. All of these are more impeachable offenses. More than 250,000 people have joined the nonpartisan campaign to impeach him. Will you, Congresswoman Jayapal, join Representative Al Green in calling for impeachment proceedings against Trump, recognizing that even though the votes are not there today to impeach, we must start now building the case for the impeachment of Trump? He's a twice impeached president. Is it worth trying to impeach him a third time?
I mean, look, I'm happy. I was in the Judiciary Committee on the impeachment hearings. I called for the impeachment of Donald Trump the first time and the second time, and I'm sure I'll probably do it again for the third time. The problem has been that to impeach a president, people from the other side have to be willing to do their constitutional obligation. And we got close in the Senate on the trial to convict, but we didn't get there. We did impeach him in the House twice, but the Senate would not convict. So that's why he's still here.
Mitch McConnell has much to answer for as he leaves
He
politics.
certainly does.
For
You can
good
trace a lot of it back to that.
and good riddance. One anonymous subscriber says, Democratic leaders keep telling us to get onto the streets and fight. What will you do to keep us safe from state-sanctioned violence? I'm from New York City, and the New York Police Department is violent with protesters all the time without accountability. I asked Hakeem Jeffries the same question, and he ducked it.
Well, what I would say is that, because I've been arrested myself for civil disobedience, both in Congress and outside of Congress. And what we always do is we tell people what the threats are. When the civil rights movement had people at lunch counters, they were brutally assaulted, but they were trained. They were choosing to do that because they understood the stakes. I'm not asking anyone to be brutally assaulted, by the way, but I am saying that this is why I think we have to be serious about our education and our training. When I say nonviolent resistance, I'm not talking about just going down and chaining yourself to the, to a White House gate, which some people may want to do. I want to get more than just a nice headlines on it. I think we actually have to be very coordinated, strategic. We have to train people about what the risks are. The risks are greater for some people than others. Some will choose not to do that. That is okay. But we need to start educating people and thinking about it in the way the civil rights movement did, in the way that the anti-apartheid movement did in South Africa, in the way that Arab Spring in Egypt. I mean, we need to really start thinking about what is at stake and what people are willing to put forward and how we do the most we can to protect people, with the understanding that if you are out there in a coordinated action, you do everything you can to protect people. But at the end of the day, there is a risk to it. And again, everyone has to make their own choices. I remember when I got arrested in a giant, very coordinated protest, the biggest ever, of undocumented immigrants, 3 generations of women, grandmothers, mothers, kids, in the Capitol, and we had a very long 6 months. We planned for that, and people decided to take the risk, even though if you were undocumented, you would be deported. Everybody understood that risk, but they decided to take it. And so that's the kind of education, training, and collective action building that we need to do.
Mark Raggio says, Representative Jayapal, you'll have to message to these folks, I think Trump voters, that they got conned. Sometimes people have a problem being told that they got conned. Yes. Any ideas on how to send that message, or at least are folks working on that in the Democratic Party?
Yes. Well, one of the big messages around the budget that we were all pretty disciplined about was that this was a betrayal of working families and middle-class families across the country, because a lot of people did vote for Trump. And so talking about what he promised and what he delivered, I think is starting to break through when 2/3 of people say, wait a second, you said you were going to lower prices on day one and deal with inflation. That's why you won the election, despite what anyone might say, blaming radical left for, about bathrooms or something. No, it was about the economy. And he promised some things and he's not delivering. So the more he's unable to deliver, the more prices go up, the more I think we reach those Trump voters. I also see real signs of progress in the recent protests that we're seeing at Republican offices. That is not necessary. I mean, there are some groups that are organizing, but a lot of it is organic anger. When people see Musk, who's not even elected, who's never been confirmed, nothing, brandishing a chainsaw as people are losing their jobs, losing their services, losing their veterans, this becomes a real issue, I think, for a lot of people who say, wait a second, that's not what I voted for. So I think we have to continue to be disciplined about that.
Let's talk about foreign policy. P. Buckley in the comment says, until the stench of Genocide Joe's enthusiastic support for mass murder is addressed, no matter what Trump and his idiots do, you've lost a lot of people. Can you discuss that, is what he asks.
Yeah, I mean, Mehdi, you know how strongly I feel about this and how much I did to try and push back and to speak out and to demand
They didn't listen to you.
Yes, they didn't listen and they were wrong. And we lost a lot of people because of that. And I don't know if we can get them back, but we have to try. I think what Trump is doing right now is horrific. I mean, this video that he's released of Gaza, turning Gaza into his personal Trump properties and resorts. Meanwhile, you know, in the West Bank, you got tanks coming in, you've got all these things happening that are, you know, people are actively talking about. There's no more two-state solution. There's an active displacement effort. I had the opportunity to meet with the King of Jordan when he was here because I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee now. And it is clear that that's not, Arab leaders don't subscribe to what Trump is saying about displacing Palestinians and, you know, out of the West Bank, out of Gaza. I think it's going to be extremely difficult, and I'm going to keep pushing for the things I think are right. And I'm going to keep speaking out against Democrats, Republicans who refuse to recognize the need for the Palestinian people and the Israeli people to be able to live in peace and security. And we have to be really clear about that.
There are a lot of people in the Q&A who are very upset about the Middle East. Tariq Nabi says he's a former Democrat who's disgusted by your party's abetting of a genocide. He won't come back to the Democrats, he says, until a truly progressive party is built that follows international law. Anand Atre mentions that your sister lost to an AIPAC-backed Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Dexter in Oregon's 3rd Congressional District primary. Dea Kenyon says, how about AIPAC? Can we call them out?
I have, as you know, we have an active effort to stop AIPAC from being involved in Democratic primaries. Look, they tried to target me and they couldn't. They couldn't because it didn't work in my district. And so instead they went after my sister and poured $7.5 million into her race in the last 21 days. It was outrageous. And I just think we have to be clear that these AIPAC donors are Trump Republican donors for the most part, not everywhere, but the vast majority of them are people who are taking $1 million, $2 million of their wealth, and they're turning it against progressive Democrats, mostly women of color, not all, my friend Jamal Bowman, but mostly women of color and progressive districts who are willing to speak out on the outrageousness of what has happened in Gaza and what AIPAC is doing. So it is very tied to the right-wing agenda, and they're quite happy to take us out, not just because of our views on Gaza and the Middle East, but because we also support a minimum wage, because we support, you know, Medicare for all, because we support all these things that are about the American people. So it's important for people to make that tie. That's why we wrote a letter about getting AIPAC out of Democratic primaries. It's why we've been pushing the party on this and outside independent expenditures. It's a massive problem. I'm going to continue to speak out. Nobody's going to silence me. They tried to take me out and they couldn't do it. And if they want to come after me again, fine. But I have a district that respects that I stand up for the human rights of everybody.
We should do a quick shout out to Jamal Bowman and Corey Bush, who are launching a show together for Zeteo.
I know.
We're filming the first episode very soon. It's called Bowman and Bush. So please do all sign up if you're all paid subscribers on the show. But get your friends and family to sign up to support Zeteo. Let me put this before we wrap up. Let me tell. Oh, this is an interesting one from Al Horcher. It's not a question, but I want to read out. As a white boomer, I'm only now beginning to understand how hard black people had to fight for centuries, culminating in the 60s. I told my adult daughter last night her father may need to get his head cracked by a policeman's baton in the near future. There's someone endorsing the idea of taking to the streets. As you've said, hopefully it won't come to violence, but we've seen how these people are. Let's have a look at this. Oh, this is a good question. Nicole Duran says, is there any recognition from your colleagues in the House who are Republicans about how far they've strayed from their former Lord and Savior, Ronald Reagan? The alignment with Russia would have been unthinkable from the Republicans 40 years ago. Nicole is a West Seattle constituent of yours.
Yeah, no, I think that's the really distressing part, is that there is no recognition of that. And most of the people who did recognize that are gone. There's very few who survived, speaking out against Trump. I can count them. I think it's like two.
Yeah.
So, most of them are gone. And that's why, if you have a chance to watch the discussion in Judiciary Committee today on January 6th, I mean, the whole thing was interesting because it was about separation of powers and other things. But I would recommend watching it because they got uncomfortable, but none of them could say that it was an insurrection. They insisted on making the distinction. It was not an insurrection, it was a riot. And when they had said that they had said very strong language in the moment as they were running away from those insurrections.
Oh, they all thought it was an insurrection on January the 6th and January the 7th. Do you remember Ted Cruz called it domestic terrorism until Tucker Carlson told him off? And then he went on Tucker Carlson and groveled and said, I'm so sorry, I should never have called it terrorism. Eric Lewis, who's a new city council member, says coordinating the dissemination of a progressive message at a local level, such as being a city council member, is difficult if we cannot effectively communicate with those at a federal level. How can we improve this process? Everything is local, he says.
Well, absolutely. That's why Local Progress is such an important organization across the country that, brings together local elected officials. And then we coordinated at the CPC. When I was chair, we coordinated with both Local Progress and with, there's a state organization that I've just gone blank on the name of, but a similar thing with state legislators, because I absolutely think we have to be working together. I know I coordinate very closely with my state legislators, and to the extent possible with my city council on issues that are, that are pressing. So if you're a progressive, which I assume most people are, if they're watching you, Mehdi, then I would suggest you look into Local Progress and join, because it's a great group of people at the local level, coordinating not only with federal officials, but across cities, right? So that we can move policies, messaging, have discipline around this across our cities.
Not only is a lot of people watching progressives, they're not all Americans. Beth Wilson says, what would be helpful for Canadians and other non-Americans to do? What's your advice to Beth?
Guess what I got today on my desk? This was these are mittens, Beth, from our friends and allies in the U.S.-Canada alliance, because obviously we're treating Canada so badly. And I know Canadians are furious, but I do think it's very, very important I think you said you were Canadian.
I think Beth is a Canadian from the way she's phrased the question.
So I do think that this is very important to have your own countries holding Trump accountable. Look, there's not a lot. I mean, this is going to be a whole rejiggering of global leadership and relationships. And we are going to be counting on Western democracies like Canada, like Europe, European countries to come together and refuse to kowtow to him and to Putin and to all the other dictators in the world that are cheering on his success here in the country. Trump is playing completely into Putin's hands, because there is nothing that Putin would like to see better than to have democracy collapse in the United States. Not only because then he can make the argument that it didn't succeed, it's not a successful form of government, but also it's a weaker country. And all he has to do now is play to one guy's ego, which isn't that hard, actually, versus actually deal with the power of a democracy that has built a global coalition.
And it's so important, I think, for progressives to understand that you can be pro-peace in Ukraine without being pro-Putin, who is a vile right-wing dictator. Let me wrap up. We've taken over 20 questions. Thank you for your time, and thank you, everyone, for joining. We've had over 200 people on this call, so we couldn't take the other 48 questions, I think, in the chat. My apologies. Hopefully, the Congresswoman will come back again. But for now, let me end by asking you this question. I ask a lot of guests this question these days. These are dark times. You called it a constitutional crisis earlier, a coup. You're in Congress. You're fighting the good fight in the belly of the beast. How do you keep hope alive?
I really keep hope alive when I talk to my constituents, and when I talk to people who are in really vulnerable positions, whether it's an undocumented immigrant that's fearing for their safety, or whether it's, a struggling worker who's barely paying for groceries or housing. And I think about those people, and I think about what I'm here fighting for, and I have visions of the very people whose lives I want to help protect, make better, provide opportunity for. And that is really what brings me hope. I bring those undocumented immigrants who took that risk when they were going to be deported. I wasn't. I took the risk, but I wasn't going to be deported. They were. I think about the immigrants I've worked with who literally crossed deserts without shoes. They didn't give up. They fought back in the worst of situations. I think about the Palestinian people who have survived despite this assault, the killing of their people, their country. And I use that as my way to remind myself that these struggles are long, they're not easy, and that a lot of people took risks, and that I have to be willing also to have that hope and that belief in something different that we can create.
Well said. It is a long struggle. We often quote MLK saying the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I always add the rider, we have to bend it towards justice. It doesn't bend on its own.
It's our hands that we have to put on that arc and bend it towards justice. Absolutely.
Well said. Congresswoman Jayapal, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you joining us at Zeteo Town Hall. Thank you all of you at home for joining on this Wednesday evening here on the East Coast, wherever you are in the world. Make sure you tell your friends and families to become Zeteo subscribers. Thank you all for being paid subscribers. Thank you, Congresswoman. See you soon.
Thank you so much, Mehdi.
Did you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel and turn on notifications. For exclusive content and to support our independent, unfiltered journalism, head over to Zeteo.com. Your support matters.